To start, we had several people that are nurses that completed the final evaluation for the CDP program and had not submitted for the continuing education credits. So if you would like to, if you're a nurse and you completed the CDP program but did not submit for the continuing education credits, or you did not submit for the certified dementia practitioner certification, please email myself and Jennifer. I'll put our names in the email or in the chat in just a little bit, because we want to make sure that you get that, and we're going to have to extend the deadline just a little bit. So if you have not done that, please reach out and let us know. We'll be sending an email out to a few people as well. So welcome to Project Echo Flourish Connect. We appreciate you being here. Sam, if you'll advance the slide, please. So this week is concluding our behavioral health and trauma-informed interventions with a presentation on self-care. We'll be moving into health disparities and health determinants next week. And then we'll make some announcements over the next few weeks around the weekly sessions will be coming to an end on July 14th, and we'll be moving into sort of a monthly curriculum after that, and we'll be talking about that program, or that continuation of the program, as well as getting a little bit of feedback from you and the other cohort to see what topics you'd like to hear and how we can really serve you and your facilities and your residents. So as always, at the end of today's session, there will be a survey. We really do appreciate your feedback, and if you have any suggestions, we really appreciate it, and any feedback, we appreciate it. Pam, do you want to talk a little bit about the additional questions that are included in this week's survey? Is Pam not? I thought Pam had joined. Maybe she's not here yet. So there are some additional questions this week in the survey around behavioral health needs in your facilities, and we really appreciate your feedback on that. And if Pam joins, she can talk a little bit more about that at the end of today's session.
And I just want to add too that the purpose of these questions is really for us to better understand what you're already doing in the space of providing mental health, behavioral health services to residents, because we want to offer you more programming in that space and services in that space, but we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So if you're already doing something, we don't want to come in and offer additional things just to clog the service delivery system that you've already set up. So this helps us better understand your needs and how we can best help you, because that's the whole point of this, is to help you all in your day-to-day. So. And in terms of the continuing education piece, we have nothing to disclose, nothing interesting for us to talk about on that part. So today, Barbara and I are going to be talking about self-care. All of you are caregivers in some respect in terms of the work that you're doing in your nursing facilities, whether it be at the more administrative level and supervising those direct support workers like CNAs and other staff who are doing the direct care, or maybe you're doing more direct care as part of the part of your work. And so we really want to focus on how do we create that space for that particular piece. And I'm going to let Barbara say hello too before I just launch in and start talking.
Yes. Hello. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited about this particular presentation, mainly because I know, as I'm sure you all are going to be able to relate to, that self-care is not something that comes to many of us naturally, but it is definitely something that we need to engage in at some level. And hopefully you'll learn and gain some encouragement from this particular presentation today. Thank you.
So really our purpose today, and the main takeaway that we want you to get from today's discussion is, how do we take the stress that's so ever present in all of our lives, whether it be from things that are going on in the facility or in general, that collective stress that we've been all dealing with because of the pandemic. And how do we then cultivate these spaces within our facility and within our own life for self-care? And as Barbara said so wonderfully just now, that this does not come natural to a lot of people, myself including. And so I think this is a really important topic for us to be very focused and deliberate on, because it really does have, it can have a positive impact on our day-to-day, and really help us be able to be better in the work that we do with our residents and the work that we do with our colleagues, and all of that. So again, a very important topic for today. So let's just do a quick check-in. We didn't have a case for today, and that makes sense because when you talk about self-care, sometimes it's hard to conceptualize like what that kind of case would look like specifically. So I was wondering, can we get you all to put in the chat or unmute yourself and let us know what are some of those stressors that you're dealing with at your facility? What are those big picture things that you're struggling with at the moment? Is it staffing? Is it the situation going on with residents? We had this morning some folks talk about just COVID testing in general being a challenge. So Shirley's putting in the chat, staffing, yeah, COVID, okay. So yeah, those, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week, those ebbs and flows in terms of the waves of COVID and dealing with potentially disruption of routines, cohorting residents, worried about ourselves as we're going in and out of the facility and back home and what that means. Any other situations people would like to share? Okay, if you think of anything in particular, definitely just throw it in the chat and we'll be monitoring that piece. But the reason I want to start off with this particular part is because it really feels like—
Sam,
Yes.
I thought I was talking and I was on mute, but there were a couple of things in the chat and as it relates to challenges, COVID, testing, and keeping up with all the guidelines. Just wanted to make reference to that.
Yeah, the testing and keeping up with all the guidelines also came up this morning, and I know that a lot of those procedures and regulations keep changing. So we had some questions about that piece too. And I would like to say that, you know, regardless of what it is that's causing the primary stress within your nursing facility, it's important to identify those areas right off the get-go, because I think a lot of times we tend to not focus in on what's contributing to the chaos, to the stress that we're dealing with. And sometimes just taking that step back and thinking about what all is going on and why it's so stressful can be largely important in framing the conversation and directing how we can make those changes to better help ourselves individually as people providing care, but also, you know, across the board with our teams that we're doing. I also want to highlight too that the reason we really want to focus in on that stress aspect is because of the implications that it has not only on our mental health, right? We know that stress can cause us to be depressed. It can cause anxiety. It can cause us to have other issues related to like insomnia or things of that nature. And sometimes it also can have physical implications for us as well, especially when we bottle up the stress in such a way that it feels like we have this weight hanging on us, whatever that particular situation that's stressful for us, that it takes that toll. The body, there's a lot of research to really substantiate that the body really keeps score of all of these stressful situations that we have. So you might see it in your immune system. For example, you might notice that you're getting sick more often. You're catching colds, maybe even COVID several times. The flu, all of those things. So when we're depleted in such a way and we're letting that stress take hold of our lives, then it has those impacts on us overall. And again, just to highlight, it's not just that mental health piece, it's also that the implications that it has on our physical health. It can also, this level of stress, exacerbate chronic conditions that we're already struggling with. So for example, chronic pain symptoms can become worse. Dealing with things like diabetes or COPD, those symptoms and issues and challenges surrounding those conditions can become worse because of the stress that we're under, because our body simply reacts to that stress in such a way that it causes an impact on those other areas of our life. So stress can be a huge factor in all of this. And one way to really better manage your stress is self-care. I just wanted to highlight some of the other things that you might not necessarily be thinking about at the moment, but can contribute to your stress outside of those staffing shortages that I know we've talked about several times, those ever-changing rules and regulations. You might also be dealing with situations wherein because of the pandemic and because of all of the things going on with the world today, you might have residents who are dealing with more challenges than they were prior to the pandemic. So we've talked about this a little bit in our previous sessions when we focus more on the resident piece, but really those ripple effects wherein residents who might be having cognitive decline now, who you didn't see any of those issues with before the pandemic, some of the behaviors that are sometimes associated with those conditions can be problematic. You might be dealing with some issues related to funding reimbursement, anything related to COVID, I think is just stressful at the moment. And because this has been going on for over year 3 of COVID at this point, it's been one of those situations wherein this stress surrounding all of these different issues has become our new normal. And so sometimes it's hard for us to think about it as a stressful situation at this point because we're so used to dealing with it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact. I also want to just say a brief note about the fact that all of these things that happen to us professionally in our work environment can sometimes have ripple effects into our personal life as well, especially if we're not managing them well. So you might be taking home a lot of the burden that you're dealing with day to day into your home space, which can cause issues with your relationships or with your feeling like you're being truly present when you're at home with whatever is going on. And so again, just a reminder that all of these things have implications for our overall stress. For those of you who are not necessarily working with residents, but maybe you're doing more in the space of management, administration, it's important for you to also consider those employees that you're working with. And I know that you probably spend a lot of time focused on the resident care piece and how to manage all of that. But we know that a lot of our direct support staff, our CNAs and other direct care workers are having a huge issue with everything going on as it relates to the pandemic. And those structural and systemic issues surrounding that, of course, they've always been around, but some of them have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So things like stigma due to the pandemic, I believe in one of our original first sessions, we talked about this a little bit, wherein some of you expressed that your staff were feeling that stigma associated with working in a nursing facility because they were getting some backlash from the families of residents when there was COVID in the nursing facility, that it was the staff's fault, like the staff brought it in, was the kind of common language that was used towards staff. And so that created a stigma, right, associated with working in nursing facilities. There's also just that collective kind of stress and challenge due to the pandemic weighing on one's mental health. And in addition to that, I think we've seen a lot of other issues in our world today that we're dealing with economically, with inflation, the cost of gas and other prices, things that are really challenging for our staff who are not paid that very much money often. And so really that increasing financial burden can have implications for them as well. Staff have also probably dealt with loss of social connections because of the work that they're doing, maybe trying to stay safe and not going into the community so much, knowing that they could be, carrying COVID. So those losses of things that they once found enjoyment in have went away. And then I guess in general, you could also say that a lot of us have faced that, even like just in general from the pandemic, of those social connections and not being able to go out into the community as much as we once did, and having, large celebration type events being canceled because of the pandemic. And then there's that grief and loss that individuals are dealing with, missing that normalcy that we know is such a huge factor at this point, because in some respects, this has become our new normal, and we're not necessarily focused on equipping ourselves to deal with any of that. So these are some things that you might see in your direct staff, support staff, like your CNAs, who are really struggling and maybe don't have the space, given the type of work that they're doing, to be able to spend time talking about that and talking about their feelings related to all of this. So something to be aware of. I want to highlight that often when we talk about self-care, I think that it has turned into a commercialization of self-care that exists out there in the world, that has been perpetuated by social media and by the internet about what self-care really is. And so a lot of times when we talk about this, I like to step back and say that, you know, self-care doesn't have to be elaborate. It does not have to be this grandiose thing that you do. It also doesn't have to be something like a vacation or something where you're spending a ton of money, like going for a spa day. Yes, you might enjoy those, and those can be great aspects of self-care, but that's not all that self-care is, and nor should it be. I think when we get wrapped up into that commercialization of, I have to buy this thing in order to take care of myself, that becomes problematic, because it's not really focused on the heart of what self-care is, which is really focusing on those small moments day to day, where you're creating that space where you can focus on yourself. And to that point, really focusing on recharging your batteries. And I like to use this imagery because I think of all of us as having a certain capacity to be able to provide care and to do the work that we need to do day to day, in terms of the work that we do in nursing facilities. And when our battery gets low, it's just like your device, your cell phone or your computer. You need to plug it in, right? You need to charge. And so we need to do that every day, typically, and find that one thing that we can do, even if it's a short amount of time, to recharge our batteries. And again, I want to focus on, I think that a lot of times in the modern conceptualization of self-care, we've really gotten away from the heart of what it is. And we've made it this grand thing, like going on a 12-day vacation. And again, I don't think that that helps eliminate some of those day-to-day stressors that we're struggling with. And that can be so problematic and challenging for us. So I'm going to highlight a couple of things in terms of taking, and some of this is going to sound like common sense, but I don't think we always frame it as self-care when we engage in these types of things. So I want to focus on just some routine things that you can put into practice that can really help you in terms of taking care of yourself. One of them is getting regular exercise. We know that just 30 minutes of walking every day can help boost your mood and improve your overall health. I think that it's also really important to understand that sometimes we can't cultivate that full 30 minutes or whatever the amount of time is that we want to put into exercising all at one time. So if it works better for you to break that up throughout the day and take mini 5-minute walks here and there, because that's what works for you, I think that if that's what works for you, that's how you should proceed. I think more importantly, consistency is key and can be very helpful. So I think that that's something to consider as well. I'm trying to think, is there anybody who would like to share? Have you all ever tried doing a walking group at your facility? Even if it's the staff working with the residents on this, is that something you all have ever considered or tried? Or to Justin's point, are there any opportunities during the day to walk or exercise? See a couple of faces thinking about it.
I know that some people, shared this morning that they felt like because of the staffing shortages recently, it sort of even took away a lot of this. And I just don't know if, that, I think that's something that I've seen at my facility. So I'm not sure if also, I know that's a struggle, kind of trying to think about even how to add this kind of stuff into your regular day. I'm not sure if anyone else is kind of feeling that.
That's a really great point, Dr. Citrone. I think that, sometimes things like this, even simple things like exercise, fall off of our radar, right, as being prioritized, especially with staffing issues.
Really,
Diane has a comment in the chat. We have a large campus. Many people walk in small groups. I think that's really great. I also want to encourage you all, if there's opportunities for you to participate in those groups, even if it's, again, for 5 minutes or 10 minutes here and there, not only does it help you connect with the residents, but it's also self-care for you. It's you getting that movement throughout the day. I think that it's also important too that sometimes, depending on what our role is, we might sit at a chair at a desk all day. And that can be really bad too for, us just getting up and moving, because we just get focused on whatever that task is at hand. So I'd like to encourage you, whether it be to join in one of the groups that are happening with the residents from time to time, or walking across your campus, really find those even small periods of time where you can get up and get moving. Even if you have to set a timer on your phone or something like that to remind yourself every hour, just to at least stand up and stretch, so that you're not necessarily really, just sitting constantly, to get that movement incorporated in. The other thing you might consider doing too is walking during lunch breaks. If you have the opportunity to actually have dedicated time for that, or if you have staff that you're working with, that you can really focus in on that piece and encourage them to move forward with incorporating that movement into their lunchtime would be really good. Justin, you have a really great suggestion as well. I found calendar reminders really helpful to remind myself to move throughout the day. I think that's really great. I think, sometimes if people have those fancy watches, sometimes they tell you to stand up and move. Sometimes that can be annoying, but
yeah. I was just going to reference that, Sam, because I have one of those Apple watches. I think that's what it is. And it is annoying, but it is a good reminder. And it simply reminds me to when I should stand, because I sit at a computer all day. So I know some of you may have those gadgets, and I'm sure your staff do too. So they can be useful.
So whatever works for you in terms of the reminders piece. Also, another thing that I've used in the past is to really encourage a colleague, a walking friend, to challenge me. So maybe if they notice I haven't moved during the day, to tell me to stand up and go exercise, or, having that kind of friendship with somebody that you work with can be helpful as well, because it can help in terms of, really challenging you and helping you stay accountable to some of these different pieces. So exercise, one really great thing that you can do to take care of yourself. Again, that's very simple. Another thing that I really wanted to highlight is making sleep a priority. I know that can be so difficult, especially if you've got a lot going on outside of your job environment. Maybe you've got children or grandchildren that you're taking care of, and so they have after school activities, so you're not getting home till late, and then you're helping them get ready for bed, and you're prioritizing that caregiving aspect of your life, and you're at home. But it's really, really important. Sleep is like what I would call the great reset for us every day. Much like sometimes we have to turn off our computers or our phones to get them to work correctly. Same goes for ourselves. We need to unplug and take some time to prioritize sleep. Within the realm of lifestyle medicine, there's been a lot of conversations about 7 hours really being that magic number for good quality sleep, or that magic number, so to speak. And I would like to say that for some individuals, that might not necessarily be how your natural rhythm works. Yes, 7's the ideal, but maybe you feel much better when you sleep 6 hours, for example, and you know that about yourself. whatever works best for you, where you're not feeling groggy in the morning, you're feeling rested, you're able to make it through the day without feeling like you need a nap in the middle of the day. I say go for it if that's what works for you. One thing I do think that's so important that we don't often talk about because we are so clued into using our telephones 24/7 is the impact that the blue light from our screens can have on sleep. I actually just read a study about 2 days ago on how light can have an impact on our sleep and can also contribute to negative health outcomes for us overall and cause things like if we're struggling with diabetes, for example, and managing our care in that realm, how not getting enough sleep and getting sleep that is interrupted by light can throw us off and make some of those conditions or the different aspects of those conditions problematic. So I suggest that, an hour before you go to bed, make sure you're turning off those screens. Find something that you can do to get you relaxed, whether it be listening to music or, reading a book or a magazine, something where you're not just staring at a device before you go to bed, because that just has such an impact on the overall quality of sleep. The other thing I suggest too is that really creating a routine, trying to stick to, whatever time you go to bed at night, stick to that, get up at around the same time every morning. Creating those routines really helps our body reset and know what to expect, and can be important for us to also stick to some of these different healthy goals. Also creating a routine, not just in terms of time, but also in terms of what you do to get ready for bed. So for example, if, making sure that you have, if you're the person who wakes up in the middle of the night thirsty, making sure you've refilled your water glass or water bottle, using a diffuser if you need some calming scent in your space, really creating those routines, even if they're small, can be very, very important. And Justin's made a really good point about, everybody's a little bit different. So sometimes spending that deliberate time on the front end can be really important in helping you figure out some of these things about yourself to help you get more quality sleep. And again, this is a simple thing that we're talking about, and it's something we all do, but I don't think we spend enough time prioritizing it and also creating those and establishing those really good routines as well. Another thing, and I want to explain the nuances of this too, because this seems very, very simple, but when we talk about self-care, we really want to be mindful of what we eat. So, eating healthy, regular meals, staying hydrated can all be part of those daily rituals, those daily routines that we do to take care of ourselves. There's been a lot of research done lately, and again, in the space of lifestyle medicine, that has connected what we eat, not only to chronic conditions, and maybe are either better managing our chronic conditions through what we eat or not, if we're eating poorly, but also just the mental health aspect of eating healthy and how that has an impact on the way that we feel, whether it be from depression or anxiety or any other mental health condition as well. So I know that this can be such a struggle because you're really busy. But this morning we talked about some of the learners were talking about the fact that they just don't feel like they even have enough time to eat sometimes during the course of their day at the nursing facility. And I totally get that. But even spending that, even if you don't have the full 30 minutes or full hour for lunch break, an hour might seem luxurious to you on most days, especially if you're dealing with staffing issues. Making sure that you try to prioritize then, even if you're having to do meetings or something else while you're eating and you're multitasking, that you get that healthy meal in during the lunchtime hour. We talked a little bit this morning, and I think all the suggestions were really great about meal planning. So spending some deliberate time at some point during your week or weekend, if that works out better for you, figuring out what you're going to eat for lunch and for dinner throughout the week, so that you have a plan for what that looks like. Sometimes, when you get home and you've had a rough day and you don't have a plan, it just feels like, all right, we're getting carry out, and sometimes we don't always make the healthiest choices when that happens. So making sure that we really focus in on some of those areas, and that we have a plan for that particular piece. In addition to staying hydrated, I also wanted to say as well that I think, and I'm guilty of this as well, sometimes we tend to opt for more caffeinated beverages, especially when we're feeling stressed. Maybe it's because we're not doing the previous thing of prioritizing sleep, so we're tired. Maybe it's because we're just really busy and we want to keep that energy going. But sometimes those caffeinated beverages like soft drinks or coffee can be problematic for us because they really can make us more anxious and exacerbate some of those mental health feelings that we're already having, particularly if we're really, really stressed and we're trying to deal with, everything in the moment. So maybe switching to decaffeinated tea or something like that, especially in the afternoons, can not only help us not feel so irritable because of the amount of caffeine we've had, but it can also help us as it relates to the sleep piece as well. Trying to think, it felt like there was something else this morning people mentioned about food that was helpful, but now I'm blanking on what that is. I do want to add something I don't think I talked about this morning, in that something else you could also do if possible is same with having a walking buddy. If you have a colleague at the facility that you're close with, really encouraging each other and sharing recipes that might be healthy, or, working together to come up with those types of plans can really help us in terms of that accountability piece, but also make it feel like we're not just alone in terms of this piece. It can be very helpful overall in terms of just this priority on the nutrition aspect of what we're doing. And again, I just wanted to highlight too that this is a very simple thing that you can integrate that can be helpful, not just in terms of self-care, but also just in terms of, your week to week when you're really busy, and helping you better, not just the taking care of yourself piece, but also maximizing your time and being more efficient if you're meal planning ahead of time. Okay, and then we have mindfulness activities. So I'm full disclosure, for many, many years, I knew all the research about mindfulness. I knew its benefits. I knew all about meditation and how it could help you in terms of your focus, in terms of you really feeling like you, felt overall better about yourself and the work that you're doing. But I think that for me, sometimes that thought about sitting still in that place as it relates to mindfulness and meditation was very difficult for me. I'm a person who likes to be on the go. I don't like sitting still. And so it took me a long time to figure out that particular piece. And so I have found success in using guided meditations to really help in terms of cultivating that space, just taking that moment to take care of myself, and really not thinking about anything in particular, really just getting to that blank slate in my brain and not going all over the place of sitting and thinking, oh, well, I've got this on my to-do list. Oh, I need to talk to Barbara, for example, about this particular situation, or I need to call my friend and wish them a happy birthday. Really just sitting in that space and being present and being in the moment can be very useful. Justin has a really great question in the chat. Does anyone have any experience with mindfulness or yoga? Have you all used that in the past, either in your personal life or at your facility in group settings?
I was also just going to share that mindfulness can actually be something that you use throughout a workday as well. Like it doesn't actually have to be this sort of separate sit down activity like with one of these apps. So one of the things that I've tried to practice is that we all know, like at our facilities, it can be really chaotic and busy, and you're kind of running from one thing to the next, and you're going from often very emotionally charged situations, and really, really hard work. And so kind of resetting your mind in between each of those can be really hard. And it's hard not to like kind of drag in, okay, well, this family member was really angry at me, and still be thinking about that as you kind of approach then this new resident in front of you, for example. And so in the clinic, people call it the doorknob moment, where when you put your hand on the doorknob to open the clinic room, you kind of use that as like a resetting. But in my facility, I use the like hand sanitizer instead. So like every time I think when I go to put the hand sanitizer on, and as I'm rubbing my hands, I kind of use that as my reset moment.
Okay.
And it's not about saying like, oh, I shouldn't be angry about what just happened, or I shouldn't be stressed. It's about more mindfulness is more about recognizing that that's how you feel, and that's okay. And then sort of trying to let it go. And it does, I was like Sam, I really thought it sounded really cheesy, to be honest, but it really does work. Like I find that it's a really helpful way to kind of reset, not perfect, but kind of reset in between all of those emotionally charged situations. And it only takes a couple seconds really. And it's that kind of the rhythm to it of like rubbing my hands, getting on has been really helpful. And so it's something that, is something you could apply to kind of your day-to-day rather than if, and it doesn't have to be that moment. It can be like whatever it is for you. It can be really helpful, I've found.
I love that because it's something you're going to be doing anyway, and it's going to help reset, like whatever that situation is. Justin, you were going to say something?
I was going to ask Dr. Citrone, like, how did you learn it? And then how do you teach your staff, or do you work with your staff to kind of implement it?
Yeah, so I learned it in med school. I took a 2-week mindfulness elective, actually.
Wow.
Back in the day, I know, looking back, I'm like, wow, that was really nice to be able to do that. No time for that now. And yes, I do. So actually, the other thing I was going to sort of wanted to bring up is we recently, actually wasn't that recent ago now, but it was like 2 months ago, our facility had a very stressful situation. And we had actually a chance to, several of us that were involved, like a couple of the CNAs, nurses, social work, myself, we all kind of debriefed about it. And in that, I shared it with them. And then our social worker now is going to sort of try to like implement that into teaching kind of the rest of the staff about it. But I was also just curious if like facilities, if you feel like you have time to like debrief about some of the stress and like burnout that we know that is like rampant right now in healthcare. So I know those are two very different topics, but it was kind of in that setting that I introduced this as a way, because that particular situation was like really hard to let go of. And then because of the nature of the work, we all had to kind of move on to the next situation, which was very hard for all of us to do.
And I like to share too, and thank you, Dr. Citrone, because your description and example of the reset is so important and so powerful. And, mindfulness, when I first learned about mindfulness, I was like, Sam, it seems to be abstract, so how do you
what
do
am I
that?
supposed to be doing in this
right
mode?
How do you do it? And there's a mindfulness, there's several different strategies, but there's one that's really simple. And when Dr. Citrone was talking about that reset, it reminded me of it, is the mindfulness counting, where you just count, you inhale and you count up to 7, you exhale to 8, you can use whatever numbers you want, but it's just a simple pattern of counting in between those stressful situations or during your day. And you can be working, you can be in the moment, going to the next situation, next patient, next resident, whatever, and do that simple exercise of mindfulness. And it is very, very effective.
That's a good one, Barbara. Thank you for sharing that. I actually think that one of the counting ones is in a resource that I have on mindfulness. So I will send that all to you via Justin or Jennifer later today, so that you have it. It has a number of other different ways to implement mindfulness into your day-to-day practice. Because again, it can be, Barbara, I think you summed it up well, abstract in some ways when we talk about this, right? It's like, what am I supposed to be doing right now? And then your mind tends to naturally drift to, those stressful things, and we tend to ruminate about it instead of creating that space for resetting and reframing. And I think that can be really, really crucial to think about. I see Kathy's mentioning in the chat that using yoga for improving flexibility. And I would say also that with yoga, that's a great mindfulness activity in some respects because of the breathing techniques that you're taught while incorporating movement. And that can be a really great way to decompress after a long day. It can also really help recenter and focus you. And you're almost combining two things that we've talked about. You're combining that mindfulness piece, but you're also combining that movement piece, that stretching, the getting the body going piece of the puzzle. And then the other thing I wanted to say about mindfulness activities is, I think a lot of times, again, going back to what I said earlier, we tend to focus on these elaborate pieces of like what self-care should look like. And really with mindfulness, it doesn't have to be that you're spending 30 minutes, meditating, right? You can take 5 minutes and do that reset. You can, use Dr. Citron's approach. You're going to go get hand sanitizer. You're in between seeing residents or in between whatever that task is that you're doing. And something simple like that, where you're taking that deep breath and you're focusing on that task and you're reframing and resetting, can have such a powerful impact on the work that you're doing, because it really just helps us sometimes take a step back from whatever that crisis is that we're dealing with, and helps us recenter. The other thing that I wanted to add as well is that, with some of these different apps that I've listed here, I chose ones purposefully that I have used in the past and that members of our team have used, but also ones that have a free component. I think all of these also have a paid component as well, but you can try out some of the guided meditation pieces. I know, for example, Headspace has you can set like the amount of minutes that you want to use it for. Same goes for Insight Timer. So if you've only got 3 minutes, right, and you just want to sit at your desk or sit in a quiet place and close your eyes for a moment and do some deep breathing and focus in on what the person who's guiding that session is saying, you don't have to spend such an elaborate amount of time on some of these different pieces. And I think that that's something that it's hard for us to wrap our head around, because we think we need to cultivate such a large space to take care of ourselves. But sometimes it's just those itty bitty little minutes that we're spending that can make all the difference in the work that we're doing. Now, this morning, somebody also brought up tapping, and we talked a little bit about self-massage. Justin, do you want to share a little bit about that piece? Sorry, you were just about to drink your water. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so I was I'm no longer a licensed massage therapist, but I was a practicing massage therapist for 24 years, and I've been a hospice volunteer for the last 11 years now, and I had taught lots of different types of massage classes. But one thing that I found really helpful at one point is that the hospice organization wanted me to teach their CNAs how to do gentle hand massage. And so I've done some self massage in the past, in terms of just real gentle brushing. And so we had talked about, has anybody heard of tapping or emotional freedom technique or EMDR? That's how the conversation got started, is somebody brought up tapping as a way to sort of center and self-soothe. And I brought up a technique called havening that combined components of EMDR with self-brushing on the arm. So just real gentle massage on somebody doing real gentle self-massage. And so I was using those as examples of that. It kind of brings these different elements together. So we talk about massage, we talk about mindfulness, we talk about, really, getting in touch with ourselves. And it kind of brings it all together into different ways of connecting and really self-soothing. But what was surprising is when I taught CNAs how to do gentle hand massage. They really talked about the benefits of slowing down and connecting with another person, even though they were doing the gentle massaging. It was a way for them to kind of benefit from that as well, because they were kind of doing some of these mindfulness techniques of slowing down, taking some deep breaths, really connecting with another human being. And so it wasn't just giving in a of care to another person that was giving care to them, but it kind of nourished them both. And so I think that there's some interesting opportunities that it seems like we're caring for someone else, but using some of these mindfulness techniques, sort of as Dr. Citron was saying, taking a moment of just reflection in a way to connect. Somebody in the session earlier was also talking about sometimes they'll just take some time away from the floor and visit with one patient as a way to kind of connect. And so there's different ways that you can do this that you're still attending to people's your residents' needs, but you are able to slow down and take some of these components to do a little bit of self-care kind of built in.
And Kathy is asking about, she's saying she'd started using cupping therapy for stiff and sore muscles, trigger points. Do you know if cupping is beneficial to older adults?
So, Kathy, I would have lots of concerns depending on how robust the person is. If the person's very robust and the person doesn't have any blood clotting disorders or any diabetes or any underlying chronic cardiovascular conditions, it might be gentle cupping. I don't know what kind of cupping you received. I've had it in the past where it was very vigorous and left some bruising. So that would be my concern, that for anyone with for any kind of frailty or any kind of cardiovascular issues, I wouldn't want to introduce bruising. But and so this is totally counterintuitive, and I know you can't really see what I'm doing, but I'm generally just like I'm literally just brushing my skin like I would be applying lotion. And depending on the frailty of the person you're working on, just that gentle pressure with a gentle rhythm, 5 minutes can be enough.
Mm-hmm.
It really, years and years of hospice massage, it was really difficult for me to articulate to young massage therapists that if somebody's very frail, less is just as beneficial, especially if you're doing more palliation, if you're doing more comfort focused care. Just that just the gentle approach can be enough to kind of bring their, I don't want to get too woo woo, but I mean kind of bring their system down and help them relax. And I see that you followed up that, yeah. So the first time I ever had cupping done, it felt great. I was getting ready to go on a cruise and I didn't really think about it, and I looked like somebody had hit me with a stick in the back. I mean, it's like I had big whelps and bruises down my back. So yeah, it can definitely be a fashion statement, and I would never want to introduce any insult to someone through one of these modalities when it's unwarranted. So
I will say that they do make, so a lot of times classically what they do with cupping, and the kind that I've gotten done before, is with glass cups where they light it as well. And there are more gentle forms of cupping that you can do that involve, I think, like the silicone cups, but that could still potentially have ramifications, especially if a person is very frail. So those are all, I think, things to consider. So the same, I'm not familiar with the silicone cups, but I know that those have been used for individuals too, for a number of different reasons, and that can have issues with that piece. this morning we talked about potentially maybe Justin could do a training during when we move to the monthly sessions on the compassionate touch piece. And I think that would be really neat for everybody if you're not, because some of you are indicating, I think, based on what I was seeing on your faces, those of you with the camera on, that might be something helpful for you all to learn and implement with not just for the residents piece, but also the self massage too, from a mindfulness standpoint, and really spending that time, massaging yourself and relaxing and that sort of thing. So something to consider, and we'll poll you about some of those various topics we're thinking about moving forward. Really quickly too, I want to say that, again, until you kind of think more about the mindfulness piece and figure out how to incorporate that, there are some other relaxing activities that you can do for yourself. But I think it's really important for you to figure out what works best for you, and prioritizing like what I guess what I should say is what brings you joy. And so that might look different for each one of us. You might be the person who wants more social connectivity. That's what fills your cup, so to speak. And so, making sure you're scheduling with your family and friends to have that social time. Maybe it's playing board games together. Maybe it's cooking or baking together, or maybe you want something more solo, something just special to you that is your time. So something like listening to music or a podcast or reading, going on a walk by yourself. I think it's really important to invest that time in figuring out what works best for you, and making those connections, and really creating a plan for yourself as it relates to that piece. And I always encourage people, I've been talking about self-care for years now. Even prior to the pandemic, I would do a lot of training and education in this space with professionals from all different backgrounds, and then also in nursing facilities. And I always encourage people to spend some time sitting down and creating a plan. Now, your plan doesn't have to look as elaborate as this. I like it because it's a nice visual representation that this person has created and they've created like what they want to prioritize, what they want to focus on, what their goals are, and who those supportive people are in their life. And so I think that documenting this in a place where you keep it, whether it be, using the notes on your telephone, writing yourself an email that you can always go back and find, or if it's handwriting it, if you're a person who journals or, keeps handwritten documents easily accessible, whatever that looks like for you, I encourage you to document it and figure out, okay, I want to spend 30 minutes every day doing something that I enjoy. For example, what I tend to do so that I hold myself accountable is I put that time on my calendar, so that it pops up, it gives me that notification that I need to go do this, and that I need to spend that time taking care of myself. My self-care is really focused on, I enjoy painting. So every evening I try to spend an hour doing that, and trying to, just work through whatever creative process that I'm going through in that moment. And that helps me. But again, I put that on my calendar. So every day at 9 p.m. on my calendar, it pops up painting time. And so that holds me accountable and reminds me that I need to take that step back from whatever it is I'm doing or working on, and do that piece. And Justin, you're saying your wife created something like this in a little graph. I love that. And also reassessing, what is it that I need? Because I think sometimes our interests change, and what brings us joy and what fills our, cup, so to speak, changes over time. And so it's important to keep all of those aspects in play. But again, documenting it can be very helpful in terms of just keeping yourself accountable. The other thing I want you to consider too is we've talked a lot about individual groups or individual things that you can do. You could also think about within your facility focusing on groups, and groups for staff. Now, I get it. Right now, you might not be able to do that, right, because of staffing issues. Let's be realistic. But something to consider for the future when you maybe have the space and you have the staffing for this, having groups where you allow individuals to have that self-care time, whether it just be to sit around and talk, maybe it's to find common interest, maybe somehow you can build this into your staff your staff training, maybe do some more focused area on self-care, pick different modalities or different things to focus on. I think all of this can be helpful and show staff like within the facility that they're cared about. The other thing I want to just highlight, and we'll send out the link to this again, but I think I talked about this a couple weeks ago when Barbara and I did about trauma-informed care and creating trauma-informed care spaces within our nursing facilities. And this is just the psychological first aid training model where we really focus on going from being ready to do the work that we need to do in our nursing facilities to, really trying to avoid that critical piece, really focusing on how do we take care of ourselves and cultivate this. I really strongly encourage you to, if you have staffing available for this, to have somebody on your staff, on your team do the training. We'll send you the link there's a free class that you can take online. Justin says he's taking it right now and it's very well organized and self-paced. I've taken it before too. It does take about 7 hours, but you don't have to do it all at one time. You could do 20 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and really assign somebody to be a champion for cultivating this and really focusing in on that self-care piece, that wellness piece within your facilities. And again, I completely understand with everything going on in the world right now, you might not be able to do all of this at this very moment and implement some of this. But you might think about, even just implementing a self-care check-in. You have to do huddles every morning to communicate things to everybody, or maybe you're doing them a couple of times a day to when you do staffing changeover. And so, really maybe incorporating this into your day-to-day routine. I have a list of questions that you can ask yourself to check in with yourself on how you're doing related to self-care and what your goals are and how you're feeling just about a number of different areas like sleep, like your emotional status. Are you feeling overwhelmed? And maybe thinking about a way that people can share the huddle, just something about themselves that they're working on, even if it's just a sharing of goals related to self-care. Again, this can be very simple and be helpful. So I know we don't have too much time left, and I know we have a couple of things we need to talk about. So I just want to say that one of your key takeaways I hope that you have from today is to really focus in on what is one thing that you can take away from today's discussion to help foster that culture of self-care and that area of focus. And Kathy saying, great checklist idea. And we can also, with some of the other things that we've talked about today that I told you, I will send a link. We will also give you this PowerPoint as well. So if you want the self-care check-in, you're free to use that in whatever way that works best for you. And then the psychological first aid training will get you that as well. Next week, we're pivoting. So we're going to be done with our mental health, behavioral health sessions, and we're going to pivot to talking about health equity. And in terms of that piece, if you have any cases you want to share, anything you're struggling with at the facility, please feel free to fill out the case study form. We also have a link for that that Justin has put in the chat, but here is the QR code. And then please complete our session survey. And I believe, is this the one, is Pam on?
Yes, hi.
Yeah.
Hi there, everyone. Yes, so we just added a few more questions to week 21 session evaluation, just to ask a little bit more about some of the behavioral health and mental health services that you're providing both for your residents and your staff, just to get an understanding, because maybe it might help us for the maintenance phase. So if you can go on and complete that, it's just it'll just pop right up when you do the week 21 session selection. It'll be at the end of the survey. So you'll notice a few more questions there just to help us get a little bit more understanding of what you guys are doing in your organizations and facilities. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. And then if you have any